Hello and welcome to another podcast for The Diplomat. I am Luke Hunt and with me is Marcus Hartke. Now, Marcus has been a prominent figure in Cambodia for more than 20 years, where he has done exceptional work in protecting the environment, although I suspect he would doubt his success, but there has been many, and in Cambodia, when it comes to the environment, there have also been many failures. Marcus, give us a rundown on how you first came to Cambodia. Why here, and what kind of country did you find back then?
I first came to Cambodia in 1996, and my background was in environmental law, with a special focus on forest protection, especially tropical forests. And Cambodia was an exceptional case because of the civil war. It was basically frozen in time. All the destruction, the systematic destruction of forests in neighboring countries, be it Thailand or Vietnam, Philippines, it all started decades earlier. And Cambodia was kind of a place that still had original old growth forest landscapes.
Right.
So it was really, really special, and it was really a time to, okay, maybe we can protect something here that is gone in other places. So that was the original idea.
Right.
So first I came, had to look at the illegal logging situation, made a report about it, and then came back with some funding to build up some protected area management.
Mm-hmm.
Train the rangers, get some equipment, stuff like that. Because at that time, there basically were no protected areas. They were all on paper.
Right, and in 1996, there was still 2 years of the Civil War to run. How did you find working within that environment?
It was really funny at places because in many areas, the Khmer Rouge just basically gave up, defected, and they just changed uniforms, but they still had the same people in the area. And of course, they were kind of local. So you ended up sometimes with people in park ranger uniform with absolutely no training, still had their old weapons.
Right.
And they're kind of ex-Khmer Rouge.
Right. Were they looting the forests or were they protecting them?
No, it's actually quite interesting. I mean, when you talk to them, they were like, well, before the forest was protecting us, now it's our duty to protect the forest.
Right. So slightly holistic, perhaps?
Yeah, a little bit kind of simplistic, but also kind of very, I wouldn't say call it wise, but very honest point of view.
I kind of meant holistic, as in sort of one with the forests.
Yeah, well, traditional beliefs also play a role there.
Right.
I mean, the livelihood pretty much depends on the forest out there, at that time at least. And you have the nectars, you have the spirits, you have all kinds of things. And people kind of feel forest belongs to them, they belong to the forest. It's kind of a cultural link.
Sure.
It's not a modernistic urban environment thing.
Okay. Now, you were involved and worked closely with law enforcement agencies. I mean, there was a famous bust in a raid in 2000 in Thailand, I think, where you rescued some cub tigers, and that was quite unprecedented at the time.
Yeah, that was one of the first actions against organized wildlife trade in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm. Can you take us through that?
Well, at that time I was with Global Witness, and Global Witness was the official forest crime monitor, hired by international community and the government to monitor forestry reform and what's going on. So we were kind of independent from government, but working with government. And Wildlife Alliance, at that time Wild Aid, came to Cambodia and wanted to do big action against wildlife trade.
Right.
So naturally they came to us and asked us for help. And we cooperated with a link to law enforcement to do a couple of sting operations, to pretend to be buyers of tigers primarily, but also bears and all kinds of stuff. And we set it up, and then we busted them in a sting operation at a given time.
What did you recover?
We got 5 live tigers in 1 week in 3 separate operations, and we closed 5 or 6 major wildlife trade centers, shops in Phnom Penh.
Right. Is there...
This was the first time that the military police was actually used for something like that.
Right. How has the wildlife trade monitoring and, I guess, ending it, how has that fared in the last 20 years?
Well, in Cambodia there were some successes that the big markets were closed down. I mean, in the earlier days you could buy tiger skins and all kinds of stuff just in the normal market.
Right.
And then you have all the restaurants with endangered species for sale. And they somehow managed to close these places down. So now these markets are more in the provinces and smaller and not permanent.
Right, so it's difficult.
Which is really, really better than in Vietnam or even in Thailand. If you go to Bangkok, you go to a big weekend market, you find endangered wildlife there for sale.
Right.
And in Vietnam, the same thing. So in that sense, in Cambodia, it made progress. But in general, the hunting pressure is just increasing.
Right.
Still increasing, and the habitat is shrinking. So, I mean, we lost wild tigers already.
They've gone extinct.
Yeah. All large cats are in danger in Cambodia. I mean, pangolins, big problem.
Right, especially with Chinese medicine.
Yeah. And it's getting bizarre. There's this little biodiversity center in Siem Reap, and they have all kinds of things. They have a few monkeys and this and that, and then they had one pangolin, and for that pangolin they actually had a kind of a bunker, concrete bunker with steel doors just to protect it
from being robbed.
Yeah.
Oh dear. It's quite amazing. I mean, I've been working on surveys lately in the response to, among the public, the response to COVID-19 in wildlife markets, and I was kind of surprised to see that bat feces is used for eye ointments in traditional Chinese medicine. I hasten to add that's nonsense. That just really shouldn't be happening. How do you change people's behaviour?
Oh yeah, how do you change? Well, you can. Well, on the one hand, it's just changing by changing lifestyles. The more urban people get, the more they lose this traditional link, except when it comes to high profile, high prestige objects like rhino horn.
Right.
Or something like that. Then people are still into it, but it's slowly fading away, even in China, as a kind of traditional mainstream thing. Not everything is bad, but it shouldn't be done from endangered species.
Right. I remember you saying quite a few years ago now that I think the biggest enemy were the roads, and that once you put a road through a forest, and people like putting roads through forests because each log is worth anywhere up to $10,000, and the more you can take, the more you can put in the bank. But is it possible to leave a large chunk of wilderness in Southeast Asia or Cambodia, to just leave it alone and let it be?
Well,
I mean, personally, I'd like to see that. I think a lot of people would, but the human growth pressures are enormous.
Yeah, well, we managed to hold the line for quite a while in Cambodia. And because Cambodia didn't have the same population pressure as other places, you still had large connected landscapes,
right,
which is different from just a little mountain and you call it a national park or so, and it's basically just an open zoo, so, and the rest is flat. So in Cambodia you still have that, but it's getting more and more fragmented. And is it possible? Well, if you would have a committed government, it would be possible, but there are too many interests in this government that actually want to destroy the forest still,
right,
despite whatever they say.
Yep.
It's kind of an illusion. It's almost like what can you say, it's a bizarre show that they do these days.
Does that go with wealth? And Cambodia had quite literally nothing 20 years ago, but now there's probably at least a dozen billionaires who are also in parliament. How do you deal with such powerful people and the corruption which Cambodia is notorious for? It's not overwhelmingly 100%, but it is an enormous factor in any kind of business that's being done here.
It's a fundamental problem, and this is what these projects all get wrong. They see conservation as a kind of a technical issue, and they hire biologists or so to solve that. And they do surveys, and they found there's critters and whatever, but it's not about biology. It's about governance. It's about power relations. It's about corruption. And every conservation project, especially forest conservation in countries like Cambodia or in Indonesia too, they have to be first and foremost governance projects. So you have to fight the corruption, you have to get accountability, you have to get transparency, because the people who are actually the worst loggers usually wear uniform.
Right.
So, and you cannot solve this by giving them better equipment or doing a little awareness or doing little non-timber forest projects like honey collection or so. That's all fine, but it's all child's play if you don't address the big issues.
No.
And this is big corruption, collusion, and top-down power relations. Because you have the local people, and they have the forest, they want to use the forest for their own purposes. And then you have the hotshots in the capital who also want to take the forest for their purposes, for their profit. So, and it's not about trees, it's about money, and it's about power. And that's fundamental, and all these groups like the WWF or CI or so, they don't want to see that, and they don't want to address it, because then they would face real problems.
Right.
So they continue playing around with technical issues, but there's nothing technical about it.
If they get serious about it, they probably would not be allowed to operate in this country.
That is true, yeah. But that is probably better than providing a green cover for government corruption. Yeah.
Right. Another issue, which I think is as important and goes back to what you were saying about governance, is wages. I mean, the people in the countryside make nothing, and when a log could be worth, as I mentioned earlier, anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000, plucking numbers out of the air, that's a lot of money to people who might be lucky to make $100 a month. And then when you multiply that one log by 100,000, 200,000, that's mega dollars for the people who can, at the other end, who can trade those logs out of Phnom Penh and into furniture making factories of Japan or Vietnam. Is it possible to address that issue? It's Cambodians have always suffered from extremely low wages, which puts them in an extremely difficult position in terms of, you know, what comes first, the tree or food on the table.
Yeah, but what we have seen in the last 20 years is the people, the forest people, the locals, they don't really make any money from that.
Right.
It is the higher up people. And we see this actually more and more. What they sell you now as, what the government is selling you as conservation is basically just a grab on the resource, keeping the small guys out and using it for the cronies. So it's basically, again, it's like a power. The small guys, they don't have a chance to just cut down a tree and make some money from it, because it's really highly controlled. If the small guy does it, then he gets into big trouble. Minimum, he has to pay a lot of money in bribes to all kinds of uniforms involved. Maximum, he might get arrested or even killed. And the power is concentrated, and basically it's a resource grab from the capital in these areas. So the small guys never get rich. They can maximum work as a laborer. They get $5-10 per cubic meter, but they don't make the big money.
Right, and then there's the fear factor, and I have in mind the environmentalists in this country have come under enormous pressure, as have the journalists, particularly since the 2018 election, or even earlier than that. How do environmentalists or the wildlife NGOs, how do they cope working in this kind of environment where Cambodia is now a one-party state? There is no functioning opposition, although people were highly critical of the opposition before 2018 when the elections returned this country to a one-party state. How have they coped? And There have been assassinations, there have been people locked up, there have been all sorts of pressure has been applied.
There are not many conservation groups that actually have an impact in Cambodia. You have a handful of local activists, and the human rights NGOs are actually helping more when it comes to natural resources than the conservation groups.
How is that?
Well, because they represent human rights of local people. When you have indigenous people, their forest gets stolen, they make a complaint to a human rights NGO, they forward that complaint, they make it public, media. You will never see this from the organized international conservation groups. Something can happen under their noses, they wouldn't dare to criticize the government. Maybe they internally talk to their counterpart in the line ministry, but they don't advocate for conservation because it's not their business model. The business model is close cooperation with whatever government is there and treat it like an issue. They do ranger training. They do ranger training since the mid-90s. Every other year another group comes along and is doing ranger training to help with the complete corrupt situation of the ranger force, which is of course nonsense because you can train them whatever you want. If the park director gets paid monthly by a big logging tycoon to look the other way, it's nonsense what you train the rangers. And if you train them since 20 years and they still haven't got it, then it's pointless anyway. But they have this model and they just don't change the model because this is kind of the module they do and this is what they get funding for and this is just the system.
Right. It is a sad state of affairs. How much of Cambodia's primary covered forest is now gone? Or what are we looking at today in 2020 as opposed to, say, 20 years ago?
Oh, it changed dramatically. I mean, the one thing we managed to do is to stop the industrial logging in around 2002, 2003. So that gave breathing space for the forest and for everything. Of course, government then found another trick. They just called it plantation management, so land concessions. So they grabbed a lot of forest then under this disguise, and they didn't stop with the protected areas. They gave 2 million hectares of forest land to private companies, often foreign companies, and many of them just stole the trees and ran away.
I've always been surprised by Malaysia, where they insist on international journalists saying that Malaysia is 90% covered by forests. And it's not. They actually include palm oil plantations, which are lifeless, and you drive for miles and miles and miles up the peninsula or across Borneo, and all you see is this monoculture, single plant, no wildlife. And to suggest that this is a forest is insane, but they would really like the rest of the world to believe that. Are we seeing a similar attitudes evolving here?
Yes, but it's not palm oil, it's rubber here. Most of these large-scale clearings are for rubber plantation. And many of them never worked out because the soil was not right or whatnot. But it's rubber. I mean, before you were driving some provincial roads and the trees on both sides, they were covering the road basically. Now you drive half across the country, you don't see forest. You see fucking rubber, and then yeah, it's pretty sad. It went away rapidly, but there are still landscapes out there, but they're getting more and more fragmented.
Right. I'm thinking the Cardamons is one area that might be saved. The Cardamon Mountains in the southwest of the country.
Well, topography is basically the best, and it's actually the only real protection there is.
Apart from wars. One of the great byproducts of 30 years of war here is that a lot of the forests and to some extent animals that were away from human habitat managed to recover or at least maintain where they were basically before the colonialists arrived, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, landmines, silent guardians of the forest. No, not so good for elephants though, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. And we could see that 10 years ago. You fly over the country, you see exactly cleared area, and then there's a bunch of old trees standing there for, I don't know, 1,000 hectares, 2,000, 5,000 hectares. And mines. That's why the trees are still there.
Right.
So, well, it's not that much of a problem anymore. But the cardamoms are protected because they are mountains, and mountains usually last the longest. I mean, they're not as easy to convert for agriculture, for land grabs. And you see it in the east also. Mondulkiri, near the Vietnamese border. There's a protected area, and protected area or not, the Vietnamese came in, government just sold everything despite being a protected area or not. It was a red area, carbon trade.
Right.
Nobody interested either.
As in REDD, if I remember correctly, which was a scheme touted around the world at one point about 10, 15 years ago. It kind of stock market trading in carbon emissions.
Yeah, they still promote it. It's still there, but it's another of these. A lot of people make money from it. You have all these middlemen in there, and it's great for researchers, and it's funding international conservation groups, but it's not working. And Cambodia is a classic example. Like that area in the east, big project, certified whatsoever. Ministry signed papers and gave 40,000 hectares to Vietnamese for rubber plantation. And you really see the Vietnamese grabbed all the lowlands, and only where the mountains start, that area is still there. So there's basically, they ignored the law. They ignored the whole concept of a protected area. So if you have mountains, that's probably the last area to go. You see that in Thailand too. If you look at the map of Thailand, you have a lot of lowlands, but nothing there, but the highlands.
So the last 20 years has been one hell of an experience in regards to attempts to protect the natural environment in Cambodia. What would you like to see happen if you could wave a magic wand and set things back on course? What would you do?
Well, our biggest problem is corruption. We have all the right laws on paper and on the books, but we have basically two systems. We have the official system, the official legal system, and then we have the shadow system, which is setting exactly behind, and it's always corrupting the legal situation, the correct way to do stuff. And it's so corrosive. It's really sad to see, because the shadow system is basically causing real conflict between the people, because in the past, and we had many projects working with the locals. We organized the community patrols to stop loggers, confiscate chainsaws, and all of that. And the people were behind it. And the people, you don't have to convince them. They wanted to protect the forest, and they didn't want to get paid or anything. They just wanted to do it. And because of the corrupt system, the locals have lost hope. And now they basically get the attitude of, if it's going away anyway, and it's a lawless situation, and the cronies can do whatever they want, but we are the poor and we cannot get anything, that leads to conflict. And we see this more and more and more now, that the locals basically come together and fight back. Like checkpoint, rangers, military police, whatsoever, and they extort money from some small logger with his tractor trailer or so.
Right.
And if he doesn't have money, they confiscate the stuff. But an hour later, you maybe have 100 people with clubs, and they come to the military police station or the ranger station, and they demand everything back, or they start burning down ranger stations and all that. This is happening now.
Right.
So the corruption and the injustice in the system is basically corroding management of anything in the system. It's corroding protection of the environment, and it's corroding any kind of fair resource use. And that's the biggest problem we had. So it's a governance problem, and it's just coming from the top. We have too much impunity at the highest level. Everybody is just taxing the law and not implementing it. So the small guys are corrupt, and they prey on the small guys. The big guys pay up in front. They can do whatever they want. We even had that last year. We had a huge logging operation in a protected area in the cardamoms in Samkos. Huge. 3 sawmills, transports from the forest to Phnom Penh, to Sihanoukville port, to Vietnam, to China, and nobody was doing anything.
And that was all illegal.
No, it was completely legal. There was not even a cover. So
Right.
often they use a cover. They have one permit and they use it like 500 times.
Right.
Or they say, oh, it's from our area here, but they steal it
Okay.
from another area. But
Right.
this was 100% illegal, and it was opening, and it's impossible that not the whole province knew about it, and nobody was doing anything about it. So it's really a lawless situation.
Where people simply don't care the way they used to. Is that fair?
Well, some complain, and the others just trying to get a little piece of the loot, a little piece of the pie. Just grab a little bit money from each truck that goes out. But you see, the whole system is corrupted in that sense. Because it's impossible that the ministers here in Phnom Penh didn't know about it. Down to the lowest ranger level, everybody knew about it, and nobody was doing anything. But we managed to stop it by using the European Union, by using the ambassador of the EU, who personally intervened with the Minister of Interior and presented proof. And a few days later, they went in and they burned everything down, the whole operation. So that you see, it's also chaotic. It's also chaos. They have different groups with different interests within government, and they're competing too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of mad. Yeah.
on that note, Marcus, you've been here from your native Germany for a long time. What are your plans for where next in terms of the environment, whether it's Cambodia or elsewhere?
Well, when I came back after my first trip with the funding for protected area, for ranger training and so, I thought it would take maybe a month. So I went to the ministry, and it's like, hey, I have some money for you to help you with your protected areas. Yeah. What do we do with the money? And the boss of the protected area office, he turned around, looked at the map behind him, and it's like, oh, there's one protected area. Oh, look, there's another one. Which one do you want? And I'm like, okay, I check for myself.
What was supposed to be a month became almost quarter of a century.
Yeah, just one, and then, oh, let's still do this, and then, oh, yeah, let's still do that. Or it's like, no, you shouldn't do it like this, you should do it like that. And somebody says, oh, good idea, here's some money, do it. Shit.
Oh, well, I hope there's more coming your way. I think we're living in extraordinary times, and life in Cambodia, like everywhere else, is changing fast, particularly with the COVID-19 and the economic impact of all that. Marcus, look, thanks very much for coming in today. It's been a wonderful chat, and all the best for the future.
Okay, thanks. Bye.